our next moderator, Neda Arabshahi, is going to come up here, and she's going to pick up a panel that's going to continue a conversation we began last night. If any of you were with us downstairs, we started a conversation about clean energy and the Inflation Reduction Act. Neda is going to moderate a panel on this topic. Neda comes to us as Senior Vice President of the Inclusiv Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy in New York. Inclusiv is a leader in this space. They work with CDFIs all across the country and in Puerto Rico. It's great to have you back at the UIS Summit, Neda. Joining Neda, we're also going to have Maurice Smith, former chairman of the African American Credit Union Coalition and former CEO, Local Government FCU and Civic FCU. And Alan Miller, recognized authority on climate and finance, and a former projects officer with the International Finance Corporation World Bank Group in Washington, D.C., and virtually from San Francisco, Ilmi Granoff, senior fellow at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law and Financial Risk Advisory Committee of the Financial Stability Oversight Council at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Neda, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Patrick, for that warm introduction. Thank you so much to the panelists who are here today to share their expertise. We appreciate you. And thank you so much to UNFCU and OAS FCU for hosting us in this beautiful space. It's been really incredible to be here together. So as Patrick mentioned, I lead the Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy at Inclusiv. Inclusiv is a nonprofit organization that's been around for almost 50 years. We're a CDFI intermediary, and we were formed to support what we call community development credit unions. These are the credit unions that are serving communities that have lower incomes and lower wealth, communities of color, Native communities, the places in the US that have been historically left out of our mainstream financial system. So typically the members that we have are minority depository institutions, community development financial institutions, low-income designated credit unions, and just all sorts of mission-driven credit unions. So it's no coincidence that these are the same communities that are on the front lines of climate change today and also face the highest energy cost burden. So while I mentioned that they've been historically left out of our mainstream financial system, they're also the least financially equipped to recover from the impacts of climate events. And what we see in terms of energy cost burden in those communities is that in the US, Black, Hispanic, Native, and low-income communities have a disproportionately high energy burden, which means the portion of their household income that they pay for energy costs is significantly higher than white households across the country. For example, Black households in the US pay 43% more in energy burden than white households do. So kind of thinking about all these things, our members being on the front lines of climate change, our credit union members having members that have disproportionately high energy costs. In 2019, we formed our Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy. I'm very proud to say that we launched at a United in Sustainability Summit in 2019. And since then, we have, sorry, I lost my spot on my notes. Since then, we've been helping our members to share best practices in how to get involved in climate finance and resiliency and better serve their members and their communities. So what do we actually do? Before I open up to the panel, I'll just share a couple more things. We do training, technical assistance, green loan participations, support with software and vetting dealers, clean energy installers, and then market research. And we started our first solar finance training course in partnership with the University of New Hampshire 3 years ago. And since then, we've trained over 700 lending professionals across the country in how to develop climate finance products. And some of the alumni are here in the room today. Thank you for taking the course. The course is available if anyone wants to apply. It's on you can access it on our website. I also want to say a note about what's happening with green lending in the credit union space. So we consider green lending to be energy efficiency, solar, electrification, electric vehicles. Right now across the US, there are 340 credit unions that offer green loan products. There are 64 that we know of that are currently developing the new loan products. And we know that because they've taken our training and we work with them to design their loan products. And we've seen the 340 that have loan products right now, they are holding 465 billion in combined assets, and they're serving 20 million members. They're operating in every state, Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And so of those 66 reported to us, 66 credit unions, of those 340 reported to us that they have invested over 1.3 billion in green investments in the past 3 to 5 years. So there's a lot happening in green lending in the credit union space. And as you'll hear from our panel today, there's a lot more opportunity to grow this space because there's so much support from the federal government and all sorts of unprecedented investment in climate finance and climate projects. So with that, very excited to pass over to our panel. I'd love to start with Maurice. Maurice, if you could please share with us more about your work and how you see the role of credit unions in sustainability.
All right, thank you, Neda. And good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, I want to thank you and FCU for assembling this very important conversation. I'm Maurice Smith. I recently retired earlier this year after working 43 and a half years in the credit union business. The last 23 years, yes, I'm old. So the last 23 years spent as a CEO. So what I want to do with my participation on the panel is sort of represent the voices in the C-suite and the boardrooms for these kinds of conversations, because everybody in this room is a disciple of this work. You believe in this. We haven't had to convince you about it. This is great education for us, but we believe in this. But if you're going to take this message to a credit union board or a credit union CEO or C-suite, they may not be aware of what you know, and you may have to convince them this is important. It should be on their agenda. So I want to sort of represent some of that voice to sort of help us move this argument along to sort of help there. Because when we think about green lending and we think about sustainability and concern about the climate, it's going to take collaboration. Not one of us is going to be able to solve this worldwide problem. It's going to be collaboration. And collaboration involves getting these disparate parties sometime to align in their interests and understand it's in everybody's interest that we cooperate and work together on this. I believe credit unions are the right voices to be in the conversation, because we, in many instances, control that retail experience. We offer loans and deposits and services to the consumers who we need to have on board to really make this work. So I'm looking forward to being a part of the conversation here today and contributing best I can. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Maurice. Alan, thanks for being here. If you could please share more about your work and how that relates to credit unions and sustainability within thinking about the community level.
Yeah, first, just to thank especially my former colleague, Sophia, who is responsible for my being with you yesterday and today. And if Maurice is a died and true credit union guy, I'm a climate guy. So I started with climate change 40 years ago and have been teaching it and working in finance off and on pretty much continuously to this day. And one of the things that has really impressed me as I've listened to various presentations has been the greater appreciation of the degree to which credit unions are really a critical actor for community and local engagement. In a way, even though I've been a credit union member and had my mortgage and my bank loans from my credit union, I never quite got it. And being here has really brought that back to me. From a climate change perspective, I wanted to briefly explain the significance of the difference between mitigation and adaptation. So a lot of what we're hearing about and much of the significance of the green energy portfolio that we were just hearing about relates to the typical characteristics for reducing greenhouse gas emissions mitigation, the focus of the Inflation Reduction Act and its many hundreds of billions of dollars. And mitigation is first and foremost about two things, technology and money. So when you hear about things like green hydrogen, it's usually followed by already the subject of some hundreds of billions of dollars in investment. In contrast, when we talk about adaptation and resilience, being prepared for the extreme heat, wildfires, and many other consequences, hurricanes, extreme windstorms that those of us got to hear a bit about from Monica yesterday, and what it did to Hawaii, what has happened in Acapulco. These are things that are inherently dependent on local and community action because they vary over very short distances. So it turns out that you can look at a coastline, and these days you can pay for a flood risk assessment, and you will find out that in some cases, one property is seriously at risk, but an adjoining property is not. And it's that degree of localization and the importance of community planning that I think relates a lot to the special leadership role that I've been hearing about, even in the last session and the presentations from your Irish colleagues. So while there's a lot more to be said about that, I just wanted to, as an initial point, emphasize the degree to which the adaptation agenda is very much first and foremost, unlike technology, there is technology. Drones are very much being, for example, used to measure wildfires. But first and foremost, the future of our planning for more resilient response to climate change is going to be at the local and community level.
Great, thank you. And Ilmi, we have alluded to the Inflation Reduction Act. We've spoken about Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund throughout the conference. We know there's lots of big policy changes that are supporting climate and energy investment in unprecedented ways. We'd love to hear more about your role and how that relates to credit unions and climate policy.
Thank you very much. First, I want to apologize that I'm not there in person. My wife last minute was scheduled for her citizenship swearing in today. We were told the end of last week, so I needed to stay here for that. Yeah, it's really exciting. Soon she'll be a Swedish American, and that's pretty cool. So a little bit about myself. I am a non-executive director of the Carbon Tracker initiative. Roughly, Carbon Tracker is a public interest investment research company. We're not broker dealers and don't give investment advice, but we do look at the implications of the transition to a net zero or transition to a zero carbon economy for markets, sectors, and companies. Carbontracker.org has a wealth of analysis that I encourage you to look at, that is useful to financial institutions of all different varieties to understand the implications of the transition for them and for the market as a whole. I joined the board last year. I'm also a senior fellow at the Sabin Center at Columbia Law School and a senior visiting fellow at the London School of Economics, and run my own advisory firm on strategic advisory on decarbonization issues called Climate Technology Group. So my spiel for the next 5 minutes is to do a 50,000 down to 10,000 foot level talking about the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the transition and why it is unavoidably important to you. So first, and I'm going to focus particularly on the US context, where the transition has been supercharged by techno-economic change and public policy. And then zoom in on its implication for credit unions, CDFIs, and other financial institutions that are close partners with communities and invested in the communities they operate. So first, discussion of where the transition to a net zero emissions economy is. I want to just do a quick whirlwind tour because I think things move so fast that even if we're somewhat engaged on sustainability, it's hard sometimes to grasp how fast things change. First of all, solar and wind power now provide the cheapest source of energy ever in history. Solar in the 1990s was about $100 a watt. It's now about 12 cents per watt. The market is completely comfortable with the technology. And the reflection of that in banking terms is that the cost of capital for solar and wind globally has about halved in the last decade. I know there's a lot of concerns about rising interest rates and its implications for the clean energy economy, but the larger context is that finance has become very comfortable with these technologies as that cost of capital has declined. And in about 20 years, renewable energy capacity has reached about the same size as it took the fossil fuel power system a century to build. So that's sort of where we are. We saw what that meant over the last decade in the power sector specifically. Carbon Tracker back in 2012 told the market that coal was in structural decline, not cyclical decline. And of course, the coal industry and coal thermal power and the coal production industry said, no, we're in cyclical decline. And nevertheless, we watched coal quickly replaced largely by gas as renewable energy was getting to its feet. And then since about 2020, really renewable energy carrying that charge. Next, we see gas become the hunted as renewable energy has become the cheapest form of electricity or of energy in the history of humankind. So the key question is that a one-off or a pattern? This is the techno-economic change that I'm pointing to. Well, capital investment in the low carbon energy system in general is expected to reach this year $1.74 trillion. That's compared to about $1.1 trillion of capital investment in fossil fuel production and fossil related power generation. So the ratio of capital investment in the clean energy economy to the high carbon economy is now approaching double. We saw substitution of coal and now gas, thermal power by renewable energies, but we're now seeing demand destruction for oil in the form of batteries. Roughly half of that $1.74 trillion of global investment is in batteries. That's about half renewable energies and about half batteries. That's capital investment in battery-related manufacturing and production, et cetera. So Carbon Tracker did some rough, conservative, linear growth estimates of what that means for, say, the EV market. And it suggested that globally by 2030, about 60 to 70% of new car sales, or about 25% of the fleet, will be in EVs. That constitutes about a third of reduction in demand for oil from light-duty vehicles between now and 2030. So it looks to me more like a pattern, and you could extend the thinking for heat pumps and HVAC and industry, et cetera, all at sort of different points in the curve. So that change was already happening. Now I want to turn to IRA and then turn to credit unions. So the Inflation Reduction Act is supercharging that change that I just described already that was happening prior to the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. And a couple of things to understand about IRA that are really important. One is it's uncapped. So the estimate that it will be about $370 billion of public investment over the next decade was a CBO estimate, not the size of appropriations from the government. And in fact, subsequently, Credit Suisse estimated that it would be about $850 billion of public investment over that period. And then more recently, Goldman Sachs estimated that they expected it to be about $1.2 trillion of public investment over that period. So because it's uncapped, we don't know how big it is, but we do know that it supercharges already that techno-economic change that I've described. So it's very hard to summarize the scale of investment that's happening from IRA, but I'll pick one factor that I particularly like. It is that in November, of 2021, we had 55 gigawatt hours of battery manufacturing capacity in the US, 55 gigawatt hours. As of November 2022, after IRA passed, there is almost 1 terawatt hour, so 1,000 gigawatt hours of battery capacity announced by 2030. 800 gigawatt hours of that is planned by 2025. That means every year if that happens, starting from 2030, we will produce a terawatt hour of batteries in the country. Right now, we produce about 55 gigawatt hours of batteries a year. So very big change. So this is supercharged already, the transition that's happening. And IRA, interestingly, is about financial sector mobilization. The way to think about industrial policy as financiers is that in the absence of a government's industrial policy, finance is the tacit source of industrial policy. The decision of financial institutions as to how to allocate capital shapes future capital investment and fixed capital formation in the real economy. And ultimately, bankers and investors determine the flow of goods and services that emerge in the future from those investments. With industrial policy, the government sends a signal. And in this case, it is a big boozy party in the green economy as the signal as to where the financial sector should look for opportunity. And it's largely up to you as the financial sector to respond. The last thing I'll say about IRA before I drop down for the last minute is IRA is semi-permanent, because there's a lot of questions about how long these policies last in a couple of respects. One is, once money is out the door and techno-economic change happens, you can't repeal that. And second, as the financial sector adopts these incentives and moves in the direction of this sector, it becomes much more durable as a policy. So your response is also part of the durability of this policy. So now this has implications, obviously, for opportunity. It also has implications for risk. We don't have to think hypothetically about carbon prices in the future to kind of think about what risk there is for transition. There is policy that is passed and being implemented that drives substitution in the real economy, technological change that makes new winners and losers, that you as risk managers, as financial institutions, have to internalize in your own thinking about your clients and your portfolio. Now, within IRA, as a mobilizer of the financial system, there's specific mobilizations relevant to CDFIs and any lenders close to specific communities, particularly the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which was a $27 billion allocation to support decarbonization, particularly for commercialization of new technologies and for financing to reach underserved and marginalized communities. And the way it does that is to support nonprofits that are in a position to serve as green banks financing these opportunities, to serve state and municipal and tribal authorities that have financial institutions that can allocate that financing, and to enlist the community of banks close to community lending, whether the community lenders, including CDFIs and credit unions, to be able to use their financing as a vehicle to drive this change. So many community lenders and community embedded lenders are already bidding for resources from the EPA to implement this financing. That's already underway because the solicitation process is already out there. But more importantly, what will come out of that is an archipelago of new financial institutions that have a mixture of public and private capital to deploy for the green economy, whose purpose is and will be to draw other financial institutions, banks that aren't directly taking those resources from the EPA, draw them into these opportunities. So a state or municipal green bank will view as its job creating a financial product that it can enlist, say, a local credit union into deploying or participating in, or underpricing them on if they have better opportunities. So the whole thesis is to draw and mobilize the financial institutions of the United States into the process of accelerating the transition, starting from supercharging the transition as a whole and including express provisions that are targeted at the folks in this room. That's my tour.
Thank you so much. So we went from the credit union to the credit union community to the national and policy level. And now we're going to bring it back down to the credit union. So there's going to be a lot of money, and it can go to credit unions as grants, as loans. They can lend to their members. Maurice, we'd love to hear from you on how you think that credit unions and credit union leadership can support this.
Thanks, Neda. So the thesis is correct. So the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is sort of fueling this movement within the credit union movement to push us toward green lending. So a shout out to Inclusiv, which has a body of work in this space, in particular in low income disadvantaged communities, which is one of the mandates of the IRA, to make sure those communities are not left behind in this initiative. A shout out to Callahan, and more specifically, the Credit Union Financial Services Limited Partnership, which is sort of within the Callahan family. This is a consortium of credit unions who have come together to figure out how can we play a role in this to help credit unions really engage with these funds and really supercharge green lending. And then there's a nonprofit called Equality, which is an applicant for funding from the EPA, competitions. We recognize that we're going to get credit unions involved in this in a large way, that we have to do several things. One, we have to educate credit union leaders on what this is, how the fund works, and how you can engage with this in your community. Second to that, we have to now give credit unions the capacity to understand how to make these loans, how to understand what their members need, and how to bring that into the suite of services and products that they already offer to their members. And then philosophically have them think about the purposes of the fund and what we're trying to do here and on a large scale. And so when you go approach a credit union, you said, here's an opportunity to create a new asset sleeve for your business to serve your members and serve your communities. Naturally, they're going to have some questions. So a little inside baseball. A credit union CEO is going to ask, well, what's the compliance demand for this? And how is it going to affect my balance sheet? What risk am I going to be taking on? What other policy considerations should I have? Those are all the kind of questions we will all collectively work together to help credit unions answer, because we don't believe there's any optionality of staying out of this field. Planet Earth needs us to be in this. Our communities need us to be in this field. And so the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is a nice shot in the arm to get this done. And collectively, the credit union folks that I've mentioned here are working to make sure that we credit unions are engaged in the community. We're providing the value that we should, but we are doing it in a sustainable way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Alan, so thinking about what Maurice just mentioned about how to support credit unions, I want to step a little bit bigger picture to how can the clean energy transition be accelerated? What will it take? What does success look like with an accelerated clean energy transition?
Wow. Not a simple question. Yeah. I'm tempted to say, Ilmi, what do you think? Because that sounds like Ilmi. He and I have a long-standing co-author relationship, by the way. I do think that money sure doesn't hurt. And so the EPA process that's currently ongoing that Ilmi and Maurice have both referenced is going to be a big shot in the arm. I did myself work on the first county level green bank in the country here in Montgomery County, Maryland. And I know having a green bank can definitely expand the range of interest, particularly for areas of less commercial interest, lower income properties and smaller and medium enterprises. I think also that there are a number of nonprofits who are organizing around providing capacity building and support services, and specifically in the field I mentioned earlier of adaptation to climate change. There are organizations like the Resiliency Center at the Atlantic Council, which has had philanthropic funding and which is working with cities to support resilience and heat officers as the sort of thing that a little bit of funding can make a big difference. And collaboration more generally, for example, the state of Massachusetts has just created an organization to bring together 78 coastal communities with a common purpose of being able to share knowledge and to plan for sea level rise and learn from each other. And I think that's the kind of initiative that, frankly, as optimistic as Ilmi is, and he's given me more reasons to be more optimistic, I think there's still a lot of concern that we're not likely to reach 1.5 degrees, that we're probably going to be looking at something closer to 2 degrees, which indeed in 1 month this year, the world did already experience 2 degrees. So it's kind of somewhat rapidly approaching, unfortunately. So I do think having this expanded vision and social purpose to think about how to prepare for the future that now seems increasingly inevitable. And I do think a lot of credit, as Ilmi said, goes to the United States, frankly, and the remarkable trajectory that we've been on. But the reality is China and other countries are now multiples of what we're doing. So unless and until those countries are able to get on the same trajectory, we still have a long way to go, unfortunately.
Great, thank you so much. And can we take one final round of comment? Okay, so if I could ask each of you to say what information you would provide to a credit union, particularly the C-suite, but credit union in general is great too, to move the needle on the clean energy transition in 1 minute each, please. And we'll start with Ilmi.
Sure. So we talked a bit about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund very briefly. There's a particular carrot that is supposed to move and attract these financial institutions into the low carbon economy and get them lending and supporting the transition. The larger observation is that the larger tool of IRA and our core clean energy, our core climate policy in the United States is to dump sweetener in this sector. So look for those opportunities and look there. Build the capacity to identify lending and financing opportunities. And then also, that's sort of from the investor hat to alpha, but the opportunity in lending, but also understand that the past does not look like the future does not look like the past, that this is a fundamental economic transformation in the economy, and that presents risks. So having governance and compliance structures in place, really knowing your client and thinking about what it means for market risk, for credit risk and strategy, because the future does not look like the past. We are going to live, Alan, I think we probably actually converge. We're going to live in a largely decarbonized and hot world. So that means housing is going to be very disruptive. The real estate market's going to go crazy. The fossil fuel industry is going to go into structural decline as substitutes emerge. That's going to disrupt the automotive industry and maintenance. Your local garage industry is going to change because they're not going to be maintaining internal combustion vehicles. So this has opportunity and risk implications, and being across those is not optional anymore. And so having evaluation for the risk and opportunity, having the capacity and expertise to understand that and to look for those opportunities and to govern those risks is a top priority to get across starting now.
Great, thank you so much. And I think we'll go to Alan and then Maurice, we're going to give you the last word.
No, I do think knowing Ilmi, we probably are pretty much in exactly the same page. I wanted actually just to take the 1 minute last comment to bring up what I do think is a key here that has actually, in such an extraordinarily wide-ranging conversation over the day, I haven't heard it mentioned. And for me, that is, as somebody who teaches off and on in universities, is the importance of the next generation. And I think that a big factor in how rapidly change occurs and how effective it is will be, frankly, not the generation for Maurice and myself, but is going to be our kids and grandkids. And the optimism that I get is every time I teach in a university, and the increasing appreciation of these issues and the desire to address them and to live in a better world. And that, I think, is again a market for credit unions in terms of how you appeal to younger clients and customers, and recognizing that issues of social responsibility and response to climate change are frankly much more in the their priorities than in my generation. Sorry about that, Maurice. But
When I've had conversations with my CEO colleagues over the decades, and the question was asked, what is your biggest fear? Losing relevance with your membership and your community. To be honest with you, when we talk about global climate change, 1 degree, 1.5 degree, 2 degrees, for many of us who are non-scientists, it feels a little abstract to us. And so if you're talking to a local credit union leader who knows his or her community, then bringing their relevance to that community is extraordinarily important. What's going on in your community? I had a conversation with the mayor of a city in North Carolina where I live, and he indicated to me they're finding salt water 30 miles upstream. Is mixing with the fresh water and is creating ecological challenges. That's relevance. That's the local community. So when you talk to your credit union folks, find out how connect the dot between what's relevant to their members and to the credit union and this whole conversation. You do that, and I think you'll bring more fans onto what we're doing here, and then we can make some material changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ilmi, Alan, Maurice. Really appreciate you being here to share your expertise. And I think we've learned that credit unions should start doing green lending now. That's the takeaway, right? Yeah.
And thank you, Neda. Round of applause for our panel.